The Second Income Plan by Dr. Louis O. Kelso. The following is a statement before the Forum on Economic Policy and Poverty. Citizens Crusade Against Poverty, Second Annual Meeting, April 13 to 14, 1966. Throughout the sessions of this meeting this morning, this afternoon, and now, the events that have taken place, including the sessions of this committee, I feel that there exists an enormous sense of frustration. I think you all sense that. I sense also a recognition, as Mr. Kieserling has insisted upon several times, that an overall plan is crucial. It is the missing link. There is no question but that our national leadership is floundering on the question, causes and methods of eliminating poverty. I submit that the establishment of the right goal for the war on poverty is indispensable to formulating any plan for the accomplishment of that goal. If we pick the wrong goal, it doesn't make any difference how well we execute it. We need to be aware that the mere elimination of poverty as such is so vague a goal as to be dangerous to rely on. I'll tell you in a moment why. Up to this point, the solution that has pretty much been agreed upon is the solution based entirely upon redistribution. Now, I tell you that while some initial redistribution may be necessary as an expedient, we cannot rely upon it in the long run. We have 400 years of history of attempted redistribution that didn't work in England and the United States. The guaranteed annual income is precisely what the Workers' Alliance of America demanded in the depths of the Great Depression. I have a clipping here from the Denver Post dated March 24, 1940, crediting the news source as the New York Times, outlining the program announced by the Workers' Alliance on National End Unemployment Day. They demanded a guaranteed annual income of $15 a week. You adjust that for the inflation in the purchasing power of those at the lower end of the economic scale, and you have a previously discarded and discredited model of the presently proposed guaranteed annual income and the negative income tax. The idea that the problem of poverty will be solved, to use the language that has been used here, by squeezing the rich and squeezing the middle class and redistributing the squeeze to those in the poverty area is a very limited idea, a dangerous idea if you really want to succeed in this war on poverty. Some of you may remember the advice of Machiavelli, who, in advising the prince on how to maintain his rule in a stable society, said, "A man will forgive you for murdering his father before he'll forgive you for taking his property." Men today are not, in this respect, any different from men in Machiavelli's day. If you try to depend on redistribution for victory in the war on poverty, you will slow the war on poverty to a halt. It will get nowhere. There are two things that produce wealth, gentlemen. You talk only of one, namely labor. You talk in terms of jobs. You talk in terms of jobs with no concern for what the job produces. A job producing military overkill doesn't really make useful goods and services to solve the problem of poverty. A job that produces missiles and equipment for the space race doesn't produce things for the human race. It simply doesn't. No one wears missiles. No one wears machine gun bullets, not voluntarily. You think you have full employment today? Our full employment is heavily dependent upon the war in Vietnam. Our full employment is living on the deaths of men every week. And don't forget, it may also be living on the deaths of a good many innocent civilians in Vietnam as well. Don't forget it. I estimate that true economic unemployment in the United States is well over 20 million people today. I eliminate from the category of those employed in the economic sense all those artificially employed through farm subsidies, those engaged in wholly synthetic jobs in the space race, the millions engaged in producing military overkill, which at the moment we may not have but have had for the past 15 years, and those engaged in producing all sorts of subsidized goods which are not produced in response to market demand for the product, but in response to a misguided political fiat that full employment is necessary, desirable, or adequate. There are two things that produce the useful goods and services with which we can eliminate poverty and achieve affluence for every American. One is labor, to be sure, but the other is capital. The whole purpose and effect of technology is to shift the burden of production off labor and onto the machines, onto capital, if you will. the land, structures, and machines that make up the other factor of production in this economy. You do great injustice both to the poor and to the economy itself. You force the poor man to climb the ladder to affluence on one leg, the leg of employment, when that's the weak leg. Technology is moving in the direction of making capital ever more productive, of increasing the input of machines and decreasing the input of man. The purpose of technology is not to create jobs. It's not to put men to work. Its purpose is to free them from work, to destroy as much employment as possible, and to spare man from toil. Management spends much of its time eliminating employment. Engineering spends most of its time eliminating employment. Science spends much of its time eliminating employment. There's a great sense of frustration at the meeting here. There has been a recognition that of the amenable factors you have considered as usable in eliminating poverty, they are all too small to solve the massive problem of poverty in the United States. Unless your resolution to the general session of this organization tomorrow points in the direction of something that is big enough to attack and actually overcome the problem of poverty in the United States, you will not have accomplished much. There is an area in which you can propose sorely needed changes in the economy, and this would bring to bear on the problem of poverty a weapon of sufficient size to enable you to eliminate poverty in America in a reasonable period of years. It is this. Each year, somewhere between $40 and $50 billion of new capital formation goes into place in this economy. 96% of that new capital formation is financed wholly internally within corporations in ways that do not create a single additional stockholder in the American economy. If you want real equality of economic opportunity in America, you had better take a hard look at that other factor of production. You had better say that it is each man's heritage to acquire ownership of some of that other factor of production as well, that each man has a right to be productive, but to be productive in the way in which wealth is actually produced. That, ladies and gentlemen, is not a political question. It is a scientific question. It's an engineering question. It's a management question. So, I submit that there are two ways to climb out of poverty. One is through the right to equal opportunity to hold a job in the labor force to the extent that the existing processes of production require such employment. The other is the same kind of opportunity to acquire capital and own it that the rich man has today, namely, the opportunity to buy capital, generally in the form of equity shares, to pay for it out of the wealth that it produces, and thereafter to hold it as a source of income, one that is neither dependent upon his toil, nor his health, nor the whims of his employer. Until the man without capital has equal opportunity with the man who owns capital to so buy, pay for, and enjoy capital ownership, there will be no true equality of economic opportunity in America. Thank you very much.